Hello, everybody, and welcome to our November 3DHP for the Nation Interest Group Meeting. Glad you could be with us today. This will be our last call for the year, so if you've got questions, concerns, great ideas, today would be the day to raise them. As most of you are aware, this is the final project year for cooperative agreement, and it ends on December 31st. There is a new project proposal that's been submitted and seems to be going through the wheels, and we'll see how that turns out. We'll keep you all posted. Most of you are also aware that we hold the forums about 4 times a year annually in place. We hold the interest group meetings in place of the forums about 4 times a year, always the third Wednesday of each month, 3 to 4:30 p.m. And if it gets a little confusing, the forums are usually 3DHP topic focused, whereas the interest group meetings are project and participant activity focused. So that's the difference between the meetings. Today, we're going to start with the USGS 3DHP update. Then we're going to do a kind of an overview of the products and outcomes we've achieved over the last 4 years. And then we'd like to have a discussion at the end about what you as I have individual organization, whichever, are going to continue your 3DHP journey. And then also if we are able to continue as a 3DHP for the nation community, what next steps would you like to take collectively as a community? So put those in your thinking cap as we're running through. But first off, as always, I'm going to hand it over to Sue Buto. Give us a USGS 3DHP update.
And I'm going to hand it directly off to Steve first.
There we go. We'll delegate. All right. So a couple news items for this cycle. First off, we will have our first annual static product available in December. Hopefully earlier in December rather than later in December, but it'll be out there. Sort of the culmination of work that was done in FY24, and this will be kind of an ongoing pattern going forward, where the first quarter of each fiscal year we'll publish a static referenceable product reflecting what was the state of the data set last year. I may have the wrong microphone, but if this sound is working for people, maybe we'll just try to ride it out here.
Okay, it's good. It's just a little tinny. It's just a little in a can.
Any better?
I would say not.
Okay. Well, okay. So news item on HydroAd, the legacy HydroAd for NHD, AGOL based, encountered a IT and firewall kind of issue about 2 weeks ago, and we had to take it offline because it was just so slow. It was unworkable. It looks like that is mostly related to a server upgrade that it's being implemented right now, actually. So that should be back. Legacy HydroAd should be back up online soon. That's one of the challenges that we're trying to get around going forward here is some of the uncertainty associated with some of the legacy software that we're running. That said, HydroAd 3D will be released in in the second quarter of FY25. We had planned to do sort of quarterly releases of point addressing, batch point, line addressing, batch line addressing, but I actually, oddly enough, got hung up with the successor server technology that we're using in the background, GeoServer. So that while we have one team working the GeoServer problem, the development teams are still working on the point and batch point functionality. So we plan to do both of those, or maybe all 3 of those really in Q2. So we'll get the system up and running on GeoServer and release both points and batch point functionality, and then work the lines later this fiscal year. We are planning to ingest the first EDH data sets in January. We have those of you who've been tuning in regularly know we have one data set up in Alaska that was sort of an experimental one. It worked, but the catchments aren't quite right. We made a lot of improvements to the data set to the process since then. We think we're at the first sort of operational ingest in January, and then hope to work on clearing some of the backlog of approved data sets that are sort of stacking up at this point. We have been working very hard to try to get a web feature service up of the data set. At this point, I think the research has sort of proven that the WFS is not really up to the task that we're trying to ask of it. We have an internal WMS up with selection and export capabilities, and cartographic symbology changes, sort of the things that we were looking for to accomplish out of the web feature service. And that seems to be working out. Assuming that continues to work out, we'll make that service available publicly probably after Christmas. And then actually the biggest thing lurking out here, and this is a common theme across federal agencies, is waiting for a budget, and there is a really fantastic level of uncertainty about what our budget might look like in about a month or so. So that's sort of the news from where I sit. I guess if there are questions, I can field them, or we can move on.
Steve, there's one question in the chat just to verify.
Yes, for Jane, yes. The static product will be downloadable. Yes.
Excellent. Sue, are you up for the next one?
I am. Okay, I don't recall if I've presented this particular synopsis to you guys, so apologies for the repeat if I have, but it bears repeating for the status of FY24 data acquisition for 3DHP. Last year, we did 8 DCA projects in 8 states. Thank you very much to our DCA partners. And you can see sort of the project value and the matching information there, as well as several non-DCA projects done in partnership with federal partners. And again, you can see the numbers there. So as of the end of FY24, federal fiscal year 24, we have about 588,000 square miles of hydrography data that has been collected for 3DHP nationally. That includes Alaska. And you can see the small Alaska inset map. We're making great strides in Alaska, moving forward pretty well there, and actually pretty darn well in CONUS islands and territories, given some of the uncertainties around the budget, et cetera. So we are looking at about 16.4% of the nation with available or in progress 3DHP data, again, at the end of federal fiscal year 24, so October 1 of this year. Next slide. So moving on to FY25, as many of you are aware, the DCA initial project proposal period has closed. We are still accepting proposals. We have so far received 11 proposals from 9 states, and you can see the statistics here with a total value of $8.9 million in requests to 3DHP partners, bringing about $6 million of that. So that's awesome. Again, thank you guys. And of course, as Steve mentioned, we are awaiting a federal budget. And so many, if not all, of the decisions around these projects are really pending that federal budget, because there is a bit of uncertainty around what that budget's going to look like this fiscal year. And I will note there's additional federal projects possible. We're working with NRCS and the Forest Service to define a few of those. So we'll keep you guys posted on the status of those projects. And I think that's all I have. Let me know if there's any questions.
Any questions for Sue, Steve? Feel free to speak up. All right, think we got it. So as I said, and I wanted to just go over some of the things we've achieved the last 4 years. Those of you that were at the NSGIC annual, some of this will be a little familiar, but I thought it didn't hurt going over it again. First of all, the Info Hub, all the products and resources we're going to show you are available from the hub, so I'm not putting in separate links for those. There we go. I'm not going to be, you can just find them at the hub. And if Phil, you're on, if you want to stick the hub URL in the chat, that would be great.
Will do.
As you know, so these are every survey we've taken, everything, every guidance document we've put out, et cetera. Again, we'll talk about one addition. Most of you realize that Phil's been working pretty dedicatedly on an Expert GPT Advisor, and it's a custom GPT app and intended to facilitate 3DHP queries, understanding, and projects. And one cool thing about it is it does incorporate and build upon all the resources in the hub, so the surveys and all that kinds of information. And I know Phil would like you guys to go out and do some tire kicking. Phil, do you have anything else you want to mention about the Chat GPT?
Not at this point, though we are looking at in the near future, when Esri makes it available, there should be a direct integration between the hub and the AI advisor technology that we're working with. So that's kind of where we're going with this, is it will eventually become just part of the hub capability. But we'd like to be there sooner rather than later.
You know, Phil, he can't wait for things he's got to get out there on the leading edge. So we've had really good feedback. So I encourage you, please go check it out, play with it, build some queries, see what you find out. One of our big activities, as you all are well aware, let's jump back. There's a question from Tara. Sue, can you read that and see if it in the project submissions was the slide number 22 in the shared presentation? Tara, do you want to come off and, oh, that was to me, sorry. Tara, come offline and ask why we got Sue on the line.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry, I couldn't type fast enough or unmute. Yeah, so Massachusetts, we're in New England. We submitted a proposal with our neighbors. So I'm not sure that's actually the map that shows 11 projects from 9 states.
Yeah, Tara, we don't show the outlines of DCA proposals when they have not been accepted or rejected. So we kind of keep those boundaries to ourselves until we've made those decisions. So you won't see anything on the map until we've made decisions about those projects.
Oh, I see. Yes, this says FY24. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
And sorry
yeah.
for not on the recording.
Nope, no worries. The dark
is
blue are the areas that are in progress, available or in progress at the moment. And then, yeah, like I say, we'll add DCAs as soon as we have some decisions.
Right. Those are the areas you're looking forward to checking in soon.
Well, depending, yeah, where they are in our validation process and acquisition. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
And no problem, you guys. This is where we have conversations. So if anything comes up, please feel free to put in the chat or speak up. So as I was saying, you all are well aware of the interest group because you are members and you are here. I just wanted to remind you a couple of really good resources. Early on, one of our key activities was the identification of critical factors. And I know that's a vague term, but what were your concerns about, transitioning from NHD? What opportunities were you looking forward to? It was a mixed bag of anticipation and things you were unsure of. And we developed that critical factors spreadsheet, and USGS has been diligent about addressing questions and issues, and they have reviewed them. They've clarified issues or items of concerns. And in some places, they've even modified their approach. As most of you know, we now have NHD hard-coded into the 3DHP, and a few other decisions were also based on those issues. So if there were things you were wondering about or questions, that's still up there and it's accessible from the hub. That was a lot of work on your part and our part. So that was how we got the ball started. And as part of that, Phil developed a survey and dashboard, and we could see what you were doing and what activities you have going on. He's updated that, reached out annually, trying to get updates on that. And you can also enter your own information. So if you have questions about either of those on the dashboard in the survey, let us know. We'd be happy to include your projects. We also established a state hydrography stewards community. This was a place where state hydrography stewards, and when we say that, we mean those that were NHD stewards as well as those that are general hydrography stewards, a place for them to discuss maybe more detailed implementation issues, transition issues, what's going to happen here. And we have to give special thanks to Jane and Josh. They've just an outstanding job of kind of pulling that community together and making sure that the dialogue is targeted at the implementation needs. Obviously, the outcome are we've had some good discussions around those implementation issues. People have shared their approaches, and people are sharing guidance, policy documents, and other resources. So great community to be part of. If you're interested in joining, you can contact me or Jane or Josh, and we can get you in there for the next 30 days. And of course, we have the Info Forum, which is kind of our premier activity. We try to get you 3DHP related presentations every month. The main point is for you to know, you go to the NSGIC knowledge base and you're going to find all the Info Forum recordings. Most of them have a slide deck and most of them have a Q&A doc with them. I encourage you just to go in there and peruse, just a little search on 3DHP and see what's in there, because a lot of good stuff in there from our state partners, from our private sector partners, and our federal partners. So again, this is where we spend a lot of our time. And feel free to interrupt me at any time. All right, 3DHP preparation. We did a inventory of the community. Is what steps are you taking? What steps do you plan on take? What's your steward's role? How are you dealing with human resources? What about feature presentation? And what do you learn or what do you want to know about EDH? That survey is in there. You can access that information, as well as a handout that was generated from that survey. We had a workshop at the 2023 NSGIC annual meeting, and we wanted to really focus on practical steps for preparation. And as most of you know, this year we focused on planning, but this one was focused on preparation. Both those resources are available. In addition, now we've moved on to planning from preparation. Again, you're aware we're updating what was the NSGIC 3DEP acquisition planning guide. We've done it to take more of a USGS 3D NTM vision, 3D national topography model. 3D national topography, basically in the integration of hydrography, elevation, and who knows what else in the future. So thanks to those of you that were able to help participate in the workshop at the NSGIC annual, we had almost 100 participants, which is kind of wild. And we collected all of your feedback on what you felt you needed to see in a planning guide. And we took that back and we've been working with that content. Jordan did a great job of sort of not only he scanned them all and converted them to text, and then he ran an AI assessment on them to say, hey, create me some general categories of issues. And it was very successful. I thought he did a great job. And we have updated the planning guide with your input. Some small things, we had a template in the planning guide. As you can see here in the middle, the template for the development. I'm sorry, I clicked, I should not have. And somebody said, hey, could that be color coded like the metadata standard? Like what's really mandatory, what's recommended, and what's optional? So we went through and we added some color coding to that. We also added some content on specific issues such as, well, do I do a 3D NTM data acquisition plan, or do I do a 3DEP or a 3DHP acquisition plan? We talk about coordinating across state boundaries, especially for 3DHP and things like that. So thank you for your contributions. And we are in the very last moment stages, if not today, but the final draft is going to be sent to both USGS 3DEF and 3DHP for their final review to make sure we're aligning with the program correctly. So that's been a big lift. And we've had this one up here more than once. The culvert mapping good practices document, we've worked with as many folks as we can to look at it. It's a very short, I think it's a 3-page document, and it includes an attribute table that we're suggesting as a minimum set of attributes to work across communities. We have a survey for those of you who are interested. There's a survey of culvert mapping practices. Outstanding response to that. That survey results are available as spreadsheet at the website. We have a culvert mapping dashboard where Phil took the information and converted it into a dashboard for us. And then the final document is a draft. We have sent it out to, somehow I'm not seeing my notes here. Oh, I know maybe why. We sent it out to SARC, I believe is a Southeastern Aquatic Resource Cooperative. And then NAACC is a North Atlantic Aquatic Conservation Cooperative. These are 2 natural resource agencies. They are participating in a national culvert mapping coordination activity. So we've asked them to take a look at it, and we've asked for their feedback by the end of the month. So hopefully we'll have something out before the end of the year. And you can look at these resources, I mean, the survey and the draft document online by going to the hub. And I guess the main point here is, this project has been community driven. This is your work. Every time we come to you with another survey, every time we come to you and ask you for a presentation, every time we come to you and ask you for strategies or how you're dealing with stuff, this is a result of that. So I just want to make sure that you know that this was accomplished based on your insights and contributions. So with that said, I'm actually going to go up. Any questions about products and outcomes and things you can utilize from the project that were developed over the last 4 years? All right, you guys all got it. With that said, I'd like to do a discussion to kind of touch base on what are you individually, I mean, the project ends at the end of December, so you may be out there on your own the next year or so. What do you plan to do? What are your next steps for 3DHP implementation or creation? And we'll talk about that. And then the next one is, if we do continue as a community, what would you like to see us do? And that'll help with any work planning if the project is continued. That'll give us some ideas on where you want to go in the next area. So always dangerous with this many people in the room. Not dangerous, just I'm going to have to prod you. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I'd love for you to speak up on either of these questions. And I'm going to open the floor now and hope you respond.
Hey, Linda.
Yes, Phil.
Yeah, let me kick it off. In an alternate universe, a parallel universe, whatever, I'm still a member of the Indiana Geographic Information Council, IGIC, and we have a waters work group who is trying to get organized in our next generation of 3DHP planning. And where we are first, I think, going to dabble is getting the proper stakeholders at the table. And because we have a lot of ideas on data and technology and this and that and blah blah blah, but I think actually based on the advice of the GIO, Megan, we're going to start by trying to get the right stakeholders to the table, and that in itself is a little challenging because some of these folks don't live in the same GIS world we live in.
Exactly. No, that's great. Anybody else looking at considering organizing a statewide hydrography working group or or taking or already have a working group and going to take on activities within that working group?
Hey, Linda, it's Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.
So one of the things that we're doing in Tennessee is developing a training program. We have a 1 HUC-10 watershed that we're hoping to get ingested into the 3DHP data model within the next, well, I don't want to put any pressure on USGS, but hopefully in the near future. And then what we want to do is we want to be able to have a curriculum, or this is really sort of undefined as of yet, but what we want to do is have folks on my team in the coordination office in the state for GIS lead a training program to engage the end users of this new awesome data set that's going to be created, to really understand the differences between NHD and 3DHP and some of the new approaches on hydrographic modeling and all the great things that we can do with this new data set. So that's sort of in progress. We don't really have the curriculum defined, and we're still putting that together. But that's, I guess, we're going to continue doing DCA proposals. But in terms of next steps, that's sort of our next big step in our state, is putting together this training curriculum.
I really like that. So you want to build, you're building capacity in the state to utilize and apply the data then.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the worst thing we could do is invest, into this data, but not have the end user community trained on how to leverage it to support their work or to enhance their work. So I think that's a critical piece to the success of the program.
Anybody else working on training and education outreach that can either contribute it to maybe leverage or build upon what Dennis is doing, or offer some resources, or coordinate on approaches? How about our private sector partners? Are you all putting together any educational materials? Do you have educational materials?
This is Jeff Lovin. Sort of. I mean, I know we've done some of the states we're working with, but it's not as much about 3DHP itself. It's more the, pardon my pun, downstream uses, right? The application at the like a county engineer level and stuff like that. We've done some of that, advocating, in certain states for their state legislative money, right? So through engineers associations and different entities, we've some little stuff like that, but it's not, 3DHP program specific education pieces per se.
But you're educating the community so that they can be active partners in acquiring and developing this data?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's not just us. I mean, I'm sure, all the primes, the bigger primes, I mean, that's, we go out and build these projects at the state level, right? And you go, yeah, kind of, yeah, and through that, you do have to explain what 3DHP is about and why USGS is doing it and why it's a good thing. But, you got to make it local. Like, hey, here's what it means to you. Here's how you can use this data here in the state to solve, these X problems, right? So, yeah.
Excellent. Anybody working on a state hydrography, like a data strategy, like how you're going to integrate maybe state-derived resources with 3DHP, or Karen, was that? I see Karen has her hand up.
Yeah, this is kind of with respect to the national map liaisons.
Okay.
They are doing a good job promoting 3DHP and working with the states to help them understand the benefits and provide information on the acquisition side. 3DHP is still pretty new, so some of what we are trying to focus on right now is really educating ourselves more on being able to use and promote the uses of 3DHP, and also work with hydrography users in general for transitioning to 3DHP and gathering feedback on that type of activity. So as we move along, we're developing materials, but yeah, right now it is very acquisition focused, and we are trying to build toward having more educational materials to help with that transition.
That's fantastic. And I know this community knows those are your resources, your national map liaisons, and not just USGS, the other federal liaisons as well, particularly agriculture. Yeah, those are going to be your resources. So nice to know that you're getting those guys online, and then they can go out and network and support the community in the application. So great. So again, I'm going to ask, is anybody working on a data strategy or how they're going to approach hydrography data in their state? Diava.
Hi, Linda. So I'm actually presenting with Carl Zimmerman tomorrow. Carl from the GIS office here in Connecticut, and
Sure.
we're talking for CTGIS Day. We're presenting on the formation of the CT 3DHP work group, and sort of introducing the GIS players in Connecticut and people from different agencies to the 3DHP program, and how we intend to incorporate 3DHP statewide using the DCA process, and hopefully including this year's DCA application with the 4 other New England states. So yeah, we're establishing the working group to really review the different applications and features that are possible with 3DHP, and have member stakeholder buy-in for selecting buy-ups when it comes time to do the 3DHP acquisition, and select those optional attributes and data features that are beyond the 3DHP acquisition to really move our state forward in the hydrographic mapping and the hydrologic modeling.
Well, that sounds like a very good use of GIS Day. So good luck with that. Thank you. And maybe we'll get you on a forum next year if we're doing that next year. So anyhow, thank you, Diava. Anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute or thoughts they had on what's going on within your organization or your state that others might be interested in or want to build upon? Or any private sector partners that would like to share activities that they're taking on with the community? Quiet bunch today. You know, I'll start calling names. So let's move on to the community. So if we're able to continue this work, what would you like to do as a community? Are there topics you want to explore or share? I mean, we talked about that, statewide strategy. I know there's a lot of questions about how do I get my custom my attributes that are not included in 3DHP. I know we had a presentation last year, year before maybe, but I still think that's a little bit of a black box for a lot of us. Steve talked a little bit about the HydroAd tools and using those. So what are the key topics you'd like to dive into as a community next year?
Yeah, I'll jump in here again, Linda. It's Dennis. So I think, at least from where I'm sitting, we're going to start getting data delivered or, be implemented or ingested into the 3DHP data model. And I think obviously a lot of other states are, based on Sue's report and where we are as a nation. So I think it's going to be helpful if we can start digging into more of the technical nuts and bolts of the 3DHP data set and how you can leverage it and utilize it. I think we need to move beyond the strategy and planning into, okay, now that you have 3DHP data, how do you maximize the utility, or how do you capitalize on the value of this awesome new data set, right?
Mhm. So move from this planning and preparation into the implementation phase.
Yes.
Linda, this is Phil. I would agree with that
I
wholeheartedly.
gotcha.
I think uh, there's still a lot of unknowns about, is it a web feature service? Is it maybe a web map service? How do we consume it? How do we use it? How does the HydroAdd tool 3D fit in? How do all these parts work together with Internet of Water and, the infrastructure and, just understanding, especially with the data being, starting to be available next year, that's, I think, going to be a real important to start wrapping our heads around that. And then how does the rubber meet the road then with, what our Department of Natural Resources and our environmental management agencies want to do with this data?
Yeah, I think Jane is echoing some of that sentiment. And Jane, feel free to come off phone if you'd like to.
Well, yeah, I just, I agree with Dennis and Phil. I still struggle to explain this to people. And I also struggle because we don't have anything to show them yet. And it's going to be a while before we have something to show them and in California. So we're kind of focusing on our work plan for the next several years. With our university partners to continue the EDH production and hopefully a process for contributed data will reveal itself sometime in the not too distant future, and we can start seeing that progress.
Great. Yeah, and you guys are doing so much work, developing tools and things like that.
Yeah, and we do have folks that are interested in learning the tools from us. I mean, I'm aware of a group in another part of the state that was considering putting in a DCA, looked at the price tag, and is asking us to teach them how to use our tools now. And there's another group as well, and possibly a county was interested in doing it. Forest Service is interested in learning what we're doing. So, I think our time is going to be kind of focused on that and getting stuff into the, contributed.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're getting close to producing compliant data. That's coming up real soon. We've been working with Sylvia and, and the team there. So I'm hopeful.
Great. So let's get down to the weeds. Any specific topics? What specific topics? Do you need to know the data model? Do you need to know what product's going to be in your hand? What is the information actually going to look like? Oh, Steve, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in. Going back to some of what Jeff said and some of what Dennis said, and I mean, and like why I'm involved in this, I think why Sue's involved in this. Sylvia, Sylvia, and I all come from the user side of this thing. We spent, the bulk of our careers before we got here actually trying to apply NHD data to solve problems and realizing, many of the shortcomings of that NHD data. And I think the maybe really sort of emphasizing what kinds of problems people want this data to solve, or what, sort of what demonstrations would be useful to seeing this data solve those problems would be useful. We, to Jane's comment, we're all a little bit precarious here in terms of not actually having a product to demo or to experiment with, and not nearly enough of it either. But that's something we hope to address, very soon here. But if there were maybe over the course, maybe this again, assuming there's money and assuming the contract gets renewed and all that sort of thing, maybe this becomes something of a template or of a roadmap for some of these sessions next year. What questions do you want to see answered? Is it related to flood mapping? Is it related to invasive species? Is it related to just network tracing? Is it trying to relate the new National Weather Service storm probabilities, to the network? What kinds of questions do you want to try to address with the data? And then maybe we can work on forming some curricula.
Yeah, that is great. I think those two things go in hand as we are able to sort of start demonstrating the application of the data. Those become, as you said, demos that can go into those education and outreach products. And so we might see if USGS develops any of those for us to tag on to. Tara added, and feel free again, Tara, to come offline. Looking for time frame for HydroAd, for polygons. I think she means Internet of Water reporting, those kinds of things.
No, I mean, having to report to EPA. The whole way that we were able to conflate the improvements we had done on the state side into NHD was thanks to a grant from EPA, because we were one of, a handful or two of states that were reporting to EPA using this really ancient data model that used things like minor num. Anybody remember that code? We did that work, and people in my agency, reported one or two iterations. Yes, Steve from the DLG is right. And, so Dave Anderson laughed out loud when I asked him there was a code. I couldn't figure out how to map it to NHD codes. Anyway, so we have reporting that we need to do to EPA. Presumably we'll still need to report to EPA. There are other things that, given the data model is so simplified, and in our case, we're moving away from a different data set. We had this ancient version from when MassGIS was created 30 years ago, the first base data that we created, roads, transmission lines, trains, hydro from DLGs, among other things, town boundaries, counties, all that sort of stuff. So now, people kicked the can long enough. They skipped NHD for a long time until we got kind of spanked by EPA, and we needed to put our stuff in the same data model that most of the other states were using. And now, so now we're transitioning to 3DHP, but there's a lot of information that we had on the side, with the flexibility to change our data model. When Steve or somebody mentioned, about conflating other attributes to, a subset that you're maintaining on the side. This is the stuff Jane and Josh, thank you very much, have tried to elevate for the last couple of years. So without the ability to have these added attributes we were keeping within our state data set. Some of us have been looking towards events or now 3D or now HydroAd to be the way to map that, but there's no time frame that I've seen for polygons for HydroAd, which in a sense should be easier to deal with than gazillions of miles of streams and addressing along them. So just wondering if yeah, if there's any idea.
I mean, it's on the board. It's probably, I mean, it's not going to happen in 25. Assuming we don't have any major disruptions in the next year, we'd like to get to polygons in 26. Just sort of where we have developers to work on the stuff. Yeah, as you say, the logic is not necessarily particularly hard, but there are, there's a lot of demand for line addressing, and we kind of need to get that taken care of. But it does sort of ripple through the rest of the system when you add something new. So that's the current time frame based on what we think we know today. And actually related to, I saw Jane's comment here as well about the probability of flow values. So we did get a delivery from Water Mission Area from the sister branch where we're in the USGS. To be honest with you, we weren't entirely thrilled with the result. And so we sent them back to try to look at things a little bit differently. Actually, I'm meeting later this week to talk to the lead PI on that to see what she's come up with. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago, looked like they were on the right track. We're working on it. At this point, that's going to be at least Q2. But that's still, it's still in progress.
Thank you, Steve. I know that's a feature. Folks are looking, look at the thumbs up. Look at that. Glad to know it's still in the work.
Yep, no, it's coming.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? It doesn't have to be limited to either of these things. This is our last meeting for the year. So if you have something else you want to ask or you want to share, or please feel free to come offline or throw something in the chat. And then we'll ask you to come offline. Go ahead.
Linda, there's a comment by Jane in the chat about stream permanence.
Steve just addressed that.
Did he? Is that going to be in this first release?
It is not going to be in the static release.
Okay.
So the game plan for these static releases is that these are kind of we'll release them the first quarter of each fiscal year, kind of reflecting what we accomplished the fiscal year prior. So, with maybe a little bit of fudge, what we're going to release in the next month, it's going to reflect the data set as of about September 30th of 2024. So it's a retrospective thing, and we will not have the probability of flow values in that release. But one of the things that we are, again, working towards here is making this a service-based sort of operation, is being able to add those values to a service release, which we're planning to bring out quarterly. So again, that hopefully will be up and alive on the service in Q2 of 25, so a couple, 3 months. And then when we print the next version of that static release about a year from now, those values will be in that static release.
Great, thanks, Steve.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
okay.
So a future plan, Linda, would be around Q2 when that first appears, to have some education around those values.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Adam got his hand up, please.
Yeah. Steve, I just want to follow up. with the following releases for the new standards, do you plan on going back through the already published or already in progress data sets, or is it just only going forward?
If I understand the question correctly, so Linda for Sue showed the map of all the data that's been in acquisition, and we've been acquiring data in Alaska, for example, for 4 years now, and kind of like 60% of the state. We are going to get all that integrated. One of the big priorities once we get those data sets, the sort of first initial 2 out in January, is to try to crank through some of the backlog of approved data. I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but we do have better than 100,000 square miles of accepted data ready to get loaded into the database. We just need to get some of the bugs ironed out of the process for loading it. And then we will load all of this previously acquired data. Was that the question, Adam?
Yes, I just want to make sure that for data that's currently being collected right now, that'll be brought up to the standard, or if that has to wait till it gets reacquired, if that makes sense. So thinking specifically on the probability of stream permanence, whether that would be added into the data sets, even though like, you know, have that standard out.
We will recalculate those values, and they are relatively, I don't know, they're trying to think what exactly. Well, I mean, they're relatively simple actually. Calculations, which means there are some large uncertainties in some places, but those will get recalculated for the new data sets that get loaded.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all. All right, last call. All right, well, I want to thank you all. As you know, I'm the project manager and Phil's the project engineer, and we just want to say thank you. It's really been a pleasure to continue. You know, we're both longtime NSGIC associates, so working this project has been really, really wonderful for us. And you guys are incredibly active and engaged community, and you truly do keep us busy. And for that, we're grateful. We usually have our next forum here, but I think just watch your inboxes to see if we get word that we can continue in 25. And if not, keep making your 3DHP out there, folks.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you when we see you. We can have a great holiday season.
Thank you, Linda.